So now that we have ourselves set up with firearm collision and all of that, we're going to go ahead and set ourselves up with a attachment. So the reason I want to jump into the attachments kind of quickly is we can show the reusability of the data assets. So kind of in a better example, unfortunately we don't have many. So we only have one grip, a suppressor, and like 2 optics, but hopefully it'll kind of explain what I mean a little bit better. So we're going to create a new blueprint. It's going to be an actor again, and we're going to do BP underscore suppressor because that's what we're going to focus on as of now. Now these suppressors are static meshes. So add a static mesh component, make it the root, and set the static mesh to be the suppressor. Once we have that, we can add a muzzle component. In the muzzle component, remember we made one for the firearm. So we're pretty much just going to duplicate both of these. So let's go ahead and set them to the firearm just so we can easily go to them. So this is the muzzle initialization settings that we used for the firearm. And for the firearm, we use the skeletal mesh as the muzzle component name. In our case, because pretty much every muzzle device and every suppressor, every barrel attachment is always going to be a static mesh. I don't want to say always, but generally, we want it to be for a static mesh. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this one for the firearm and rename it to just muzzle, just kind of a generic, or even we could do static mesh. It doesn't really matter because we also have other options here where I'll show some examples where we might want to have a couple different ones. So we want to change this to static mesh for the muzzle mesh component name. And we also still need to make that socket. So S underscore muzzle on our suppressor. So let's swap out the initialization data assets for the muzzle. Let's go to the suppressor and add a socket of S underscore muzzle. Go ahead and move it just out in front. And it is Z up, X forward. That's good. And close out of that. So next up, we need the muzzle settings. So same thing, let's go there. And because this is a suppressor, we're going to want a different muzzle tag. Likewise, in our suppressors, we might want a muzzle temperature system. So this is one of those things where you could have maybe 2 different variations. So one muzzle setting for suppressors without a muzzle temp and one with a muzzle temp. It's kind of one of those things where it's more or less up to you. So for our muzzle settings, we're going to create a new one, and this one will be specific to suppressors. Or not suppressors, suppressor. And we're just going to change the muzzle tag to suppressor. Then likewise, let's go ahead and set it as the muzzle settings data asset. All right, so now that we have basically the muzzles set up, let's also make sure we set it to replicate. And now we can go ahead and add this as an attachment to our muzzle or to our firearm. So the only thing I'm not sure on is, for whatever reason, didn't mean to open that one, they provide X and Y forwards for pretty much all the meshes except for the suppressor, optic, and grip. Even the firearms, they have an X and a Y forward variant. Same thing with the statics and the magazines and all that. I'm not 100% sure as to why. And then they, only have a loaded version of the Y. So it's very odd choices. But anyhow, back in our firearm, let's add a SKG attachment. Now this attachment is going to be for our skeletal mesh. So what it's going to attach to, let's rename it. So SKG attachment underscore suppressor, just so we know kind of what it's for, because we're going to have one for optic and that kind of stuff. Only drawback is this rear sight is fixed in place, which is going to be kind of annoying. So in our suppressor component, attached to mesh name, that's going to be our skeletal mesh because it's attaching to the firearm. And we need an attached to socket. So let's go ahead and go to our skeletal mesh to add a new socket, and we'll call it S underscore attachment underscore suppressor. And we can give this one a preview of the suppressor. So let's go ahead and make this one X forward. And we want this one to be Z up. So let's rotate it up. So now it's Z up and X forward. And position it, just kind of in the ballpark. So it should be, I don't know if these have the actual like lock and turn. That's hard to see. So screw it. I'll just get it something like that. Okay, so s_attachment suppressor is going to be the socket name. So let's set that as the attached to socket. And then for the attachment, let's go ahead and just give it a default attachment of BP suppressor. We don't need to worry about compatibility settings or anything like that as of yet. So let's make sure this works. Press play. And there is our suppressor. So something you might have noticed is, granted it's moving with it, but the firearm collision has automatically updated itself to, be at the distance that the suppressor is at. So for example, previously it would be, so there's less shadow. This trace here would end about here. And now it's ending out here because we have a muzzle device. So it automatically does compensate and picks the latest, basically I guess you could call it the active muzzle device, so to speak, in the chain. So now, we're much longer. We got a suppressor, so it's, sticking out a lot farther. Anyhow, that is going to be all for the suppressor. Again, just like before, everything does replicate. So, you can see the attachments, everything is nice and attached, and everything is updating on client and server. Again, ignore this. That's part of the third-person project, which we do need to correct at some point. All right. So now that that is done and out of the way, we now have a very simple suppressor. So in the next video, we're going to go ahead and set up a forward grip. It's going to be very much the same thing and very easy to do. So I will see you in the next one.